What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Alpha Skies, and as you know, King's Fall has re-returned into Destiny 2 recently in Season 18, Season of the Plunder. And of course, with that being the case, we have new weapons at our disposal. The point of today's video is to take a look at these weapons and determine whether or not these weapons are going to be good for Grandmaster Nightfalls. And as any player that has played in Grandmaster Nightfalls knows, there is a very, very big difference between weapons that are just generally good at PvE and weapons that are really good in Grandmaster Nightfalls. I think the first thing that we have to mention here when it comes to that is explaining what perks are actually good in Grandmaster Nightfalls and which ones aren't. So to give a good general idea of that, take a look at a perk like Rampage. It does relatively well in most PvE activities because it's just a really good, consistent, and easy to proc damage perk. However, this perk is almost useless in Grandmasters as you find that it lacks consistency due to the fact that a lot of the enemies in Grandmasters have significantly increased health pools. And do also take note that we are primarily going to be focusing on the perks that are available in the third and the fourth column. But now that we have all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and take a look at our first weapon, the Smite of Moraine. Taking a look in the third column, we see a lot of perks that are fairly good and consistent when it comes to clearing Grandmaster content. Most specifically, I think the two that are going to be the most effective are going to be Focused Fury and Stats for All. Comparing Focused Fury to something like a perk we had discussed previously like Rampage, the reason that it works so well in Grandmasters is the fact that all you actually have to do to be rewarded with a consistently good damage buff is just simply hit precision hits on any target. Not only that, but looking over into the fourth column, I ideally think this would pair extremely well with One for All as we can further increase our damage from simply just participating in a general firefight. I also think Vorpal Weapon in the fourth column is worth taking note. As a lot of players aren't completely aware, having Vorpal Weapon rolled onto a weapon while the anti-barrier mods are rolled for that specific weapon for that season allows for the damage on barriers to be increased. And although this weapon does have a lot of perks available to it that make it great for PvE general content, I'm going to be honest, there's not a whole lot outside of those that's going to make it really good for activities like Grandmasters. Moving up next, we're going to be taking a look at the weapon, the Zalos Bane. This is a solar energy hand cannon that I've actually used personally a decent bit in PvE, and I have loved it, but you're not going to see a lot of perks that are going to make this weapon thrive in activities like Grandmaster Nightfalls, similar to the Smite of Moraine, but there are a couple of choices that you can take. I think definitively in the third column, the only choice that you can really go with is obviously Explosive Payload, and the fourth column is going to come down to personal preference between the Focused Fury, One for All, or potentially even Incandescence. I do personally feel like Explosive Payload and One for All is the most ideal role, but feel free to experiment with these weapons a little bit. Moving on to the Scout Rifle, the Doom of Kelkis. I do think things are going to change a little bit taking a look at this weapon, as I think this weapon has a lot more available to it to make it extremely effective inside of Grandmaster Nightfalls, as opposed to the weapons that we've covered so far. We start off with a choice in the third column to make. We have Explosive Payload, Firefly, or Vorpal Weapon, all three which I have already explained. Especially with Anti-Barrier being on Scout this season, makes having Vorpal Weapon on it actually worth considering. However, in my personal opinion, I do think Explosive Payload is going to be the best overall and the most consistent to use. And over in the fourth slot, I think you have a choice between One for All, Frenzy, Focused Fury, and you could maybe lump Dragonfly in there. However, I don't think explosive precision hits are going to be as strong as the other three perks that we've mentioned. In my personal opinion, I think the overall best role for this weapon is going to be Explosive Payload with Frenzy, or Explosive Payload with One for All, depending on which strike it is that we are actually doing that week. Let's now jump over and take a look at the Defiance of Yasmin. This is the Kinetic Sniper rifle, and one thing I immediately see in the third slot that catches my eye is the fact that Osmosis is available to this weapon. However, we do see perks like Shoot to Loot and Lead from Gold. This is going to help you a little bit with ammo management if it's something you feel that you need. However, we do compare this sniper to a lot of the current snipers that are good in the game like Thoughtless or Succession, and it is going to pale a little bit in comparison to the ammo efficiency of the other weapons. And looking in the fourth slot, there are three obvious perks that we would want to choose from here. Firing Line is going to be your most obvious choice if you are wanting more damage on your weapon. You also have Vorpal Weapon that you can use with Anti-Barrier this season to one-shot champions through their barriers, and then you also have Focused Fury. When Grandmasters do come out, we will have to see how this weapon actually plays out, but personally I do think a couple of the other snipers in the game currently kind of take over the spot, but I think with Osmosis, this sniper actually does have potential to kind of play in the same ballpark. Now looking at the Fusion Rifle, the Midas Reckoning. I personally would not recommend recommend taking this fusion into Grandmasters, but if it's what you want to use, then it's what you want to use. Go ahead and use it. In my personal opinion, I think the only perk you would actually want to consider even taking in the third column would be Field Prep. You just have to get yourself in that mindset of making sure that you're crouching whenever you go to reload, because it does increase your reload significantly. In the fourth slot, I'm sure with certain ad environments you could argue having Reservoir Burst, but I think for consistency's sake, the only one that I would actually choose would be Vorpal Weapon. Now taking a look at the Stasis Machine Gun, the Quillam's Terminus. Once again in the third column, I think the only choice that we actually have with this weapon is going to be Stats for All. You could obviously argue Ensemble, however this perk only works whenever allies are nearby as opposed to simply having to shoot 3 targets. But in the fourth column, there's actually a fairly decent variety of options to use. You have Headstone, Focused Fury, Firing Line, and Killing Tally. Depending on what other weapons you decided to use, and if you had Aeons, Killing Tally wouldn't exactly be a bad choice, as you could use that to consistently break a lot of the lower tier red bar or even the yellow bar ads with the damage buffs that you get from that perk. But if this is a weapon that you're going to primarily use for DPS, Firing Line is going to be your main choice. And last but certainly not least, we're going to take a look at the Touch of Malice. To explain why the Touch of Malice is something that you should only consider using in Grandmasters, it relies on the perk Touch of Malice. The final round in the magazine deals bonus damage drawing from the wielder's life force and then regenerates itself. And obviously what this means is that you basically have infinite ammo, as once you get down to that last round, you keep shooting, it just takes health away instead of taking the round from your magazine. And of course the exchange for that being that you get bonus damage as well. I have been lucky and fortunate enough that I have had this weapon drop for me already, and I can tell you whenever you are buff stacking with things like Well with Divinity, you are doing insane DPS numbers. The obvious drawback is survivability. In Grandmasters, you have to ensure that you are staying alive as efficiently and as much as possible. So Touch of Malice does do a lot of damage, but it does have some major drawbacks. So unfortunately, I can't recommend actually using this weapon in Grandmasters unless you are specifically going to run Lorelei Titan, or you're going to be running a Healing Well Warlock. One other thing worth mentioning on the weapon as well though, is that precision hits will actually drain their life force and will charge up a Ball of Darkness. And by activating your alternate weapon action and then firing it, it will release a very large Blight projectile. It does fairly okay damage and it does blind enemies, but again, one thing that's very important to note, especially about Grandmaster Nightfalls, that kind of negates this whole perk is the fact that it does not blind champions. But with all of that out of the way, I hope you guys enjoy these types of videos, and if you enjoy these types of videos, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and hit the like button down below, as it will help me out a lot. And once again, my name is Alpha Skies, and I will catch you guys in the next video.